223 conference. Okay, with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Valary Oleinik. I was really excited when I came across her profile. As many of you know, I'm also a gaming person. And so when I saw that she would be available for as a keynote speaker, I was really excited. And thank you, Valary, for stepping up, because you did this on short notice. When you have to cancel and reschedule, you lose your keynote speakers. So after Valary has a great deal of experience in training in the workplace and higher ed development. In those roles, she earned the title of Maverin of New Thinking and Maverick of Training. So I can imagine what some of your training sessions may have been like. Now she has begun to become a speaker and a consultant on gamification of learning and creative problem solving. She wears many hats, including project manager at an international law firm, owner and chief distributor in her consultancy, and director at USDLA. Valary is also a certified facilitator of the box experience, a proven method for those times when you need thinking out of the box and it's not enough. Throughout her endeavors, she's insisted by both her cat and bunny, and they are lousy typists and they enjoy shredding paper. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Valary.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Yeah, we got to have a little fun with the bio, right? Doesn't have to be totally stuffy and boring all the time. But thank you so much for having me. And short notice, no problem. And thank you for the shout out. USDLA is so proud. I'm so proud to be here, sort of with my multiple hats. Yeah, I am the chief disruptor at my consultancy. I am known for being a little disruptive, but in the best possible way. So that's a good thing. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to share a few slides and we're going to get started. I'm going to encourage you throughout that this is not your typical keynote. I hope you engage with me as we're going through. We are talking about engagement today, after all. And so please go ahead, get that chat window open, because I would love to see you all just chatting away in there. So, all right. Let's grab those good old slides. There they are. And I'll get my little chat so I can see what y'all are saying over here. So there we go. So first things first, I've often been told I need to come with a warning label. So here is my warning label. As I said, we're going to be engaging. This is not just me talking for the next close to an hour or something. And I will ask you to participate in a few things if you choose to. It's an invitation. And one thing is, if you have a piece of paper handy and a pencil, I will explain in just a few moments what you're going to do with that. But I want to just get some of the housekeeping out of the way, and that way you're not shuffling around looking for it as we get to the activity. So first thing is, it's very early in the morning for some of us. I know most of you are in the Eastern time zone. A few of us are in Central. Not sure if anybody's further west than that. But let's just check in for a second. So in the chat, which of these sheep on my magical sheep scale, which of these sheep best describes how you're feeling today? Just give me a number, 1 through 9. Or maybe none of them do, but there's usually one on here that I'm kind of like, yeah, that's how my day's going today. I might have a little bit of 5, might not have quite woken up entirely. 3, yeah, the 3, I often, especially if I need the bangs cut, definitely need that one. So yeah, just think about this. Now I'm asking you to do this. I know it's kind of a silly to kind of deconstruct some of the things that and set you at ease, create a nice environment for you to participate. So my dear friend Jimbo Clark always says connection before content. And that is a really powerful statement, I think. So that's the first thing. The other is that one of the key tips to engagement is the earlier you can get somebody to engage in a small way, the better chance that they're going to continue to engage with you. So the faster you can get something into your class, your course, your workshop, your whatever, that get them to take that small action, that will make a difference. So still see the numbers coming in. Thank you for continuing. Feel free to keep that chat going as we're going along. So thank you for participating in the sheep scale. Now, in a moment, we're going to come back to this slide, but I wanted to preface with this because this is kind of one of the themes that we're going to talk about today. Not only engagement, but a lot of times I think that we get so used to using certain terms that we stop thinking about what they might mean, and that they might mean different things to different people. So I don't know if anybody recognizes the movie, but if you do, you know that in the movie, he means you don't have any clue what that word means. But there's also another possible way of reading this, and that is I may be talking about learner engagement, and I may be absolutely correct in my interpretation. And you may be talking about learner engagement, and you may also be absolutely correct for your audience, your situation, your context, but we still might not be saying the same thing. I may not think it means the same thing you think it means. So my ask today is to keep an open mind, and I'm going to help us to think about maybe reframing some of these terms. In some cases, I might give you a different perspective on them. And in some cases, it might be a matter of digging a little deeper into them. That we sometimes just kind of use these terms and go, yeah, learner engagement, that's important. We need to work on that. But we don't really stop and really identify what we are talking about and what we're actually hoping to achieve. How do we know that we achieved learner engagement? So that's where we're going to be heading today. We're going to come back to this image in just a few minutes. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about why I do what I do, because I think the why is really important. And it's because I truly believe that learners deserve better. And I don't mean that in the sense that people are not doing a good job. I mean it in the sense of this is a reminder to myself more than anything, that we should always be continuing to check, are we choosing the best options? Is there a better way to do this? How about we try something different? Now, it may not work. Maybe we go back to the other way. But if we don't continue to seek out those options, then we're not modeling what we want our students to do. We want our students to grow, take chances, explore, all those things. I think we, as the designers, the instructors, whatever your title happens to be, I think we have to challenge ourselves to do this as well. And so that's how my journey sort of started with gamification, engagement, and all of these things. I was doing classroom, workplace, technical training, people sitting in seats, pressing buttons. And I knew that was not the best we could do. So that's where my journey started, but now it has gone all sorts of places. So why gamification, and why did that sort of capture my attention? So for one thing, I started to I was looking at all sorts of things. I went back to school, I was looking at social media, I was looking at emerging tech, and I found gamification. And so one day I'm reading this article. I lived in Manhattan at that point, happened to read this article about this NYU professor. He was a journalism professor. And he took his grad students on a little experiment, because that's what we do with grad students sometimes, right? They're available to do some testing. So he took them down to Wall Street, and they participated in a scavenger hunt or a treasure hunt. And it was one of those where there's an outside company, and you get your phone, and there's an app, and you break up into teams, and you start to participate in this scavenger hunt. So there's a team leader, and they're reading the clues, and they're doing the whole thing. So that was the class that day. They participated in a scavenger hunt that taught them a little bit about the history of New York City, particularly the downtown financial area. That was week one. Next week, they come back into the regular classroom, lecture hall, and he gives them a passage to read. It's journalism class. It was probably, a newspaper article length, couple of pages long, not very long. Also about some historical information about the city, similar sort of content. Then he gave them a quiz. Right after they read the passage, he gave them a quiz. Now, I don't think any of us are going to be too impressed with those test scores that they came back with, because they're not passing the test for sure. But what was interesting to me was the treasure hunt questions, because half of the questions came from the passage they had just read. Half of the questions came from the previous week's adventure at Wall Street. They did better on the stuff from the previous week. And that defies what we generally think of in terms of Ebbinghaus forgetting curve and how retention works and all those things. So this was really kind of quirky and fascinating to me, these kind of things. Now, obviously, this was anecdotal. It's one experience, but I started to see other stories that had similar results. And I started thinking more, okay, well, what's going on here? Because the piece of information that doesn't show up in those numbers is the students who scored the highest all in the class were the students who were the team leaders who were holding the phones during the scavenger hunt. So my hypothesis is that they were the most highly engaged. They had to coordinate the other students. They had to enter the information. They were reading the information. They had a high level of engagement while they were participating. And again, think about a game. Games don't play themselves. Game just sits there until you do something with it. Same thing happens with learning. Doesn't do anything on its own. We need the learner to participate in the process. So I was really intrigued by these kind of things that I found. So I did what everybody does, and you read all the books and the definitions. And I will say, this is a very serviceable definition. It's probably one, if you've ever looked into gamification, you've probably seen a definition much like this one. And it's okay. It's also not the definition of gamification, because having worked in this space for many years now and talked to hundreds of people who work in this space, there is no definition of gamification. A lot of people use that term in a lot of different ways. And so this makes research really interesting, because we have to be very specific about what kind of gamification are you talking about and what are your, what's your definition? So again, it gets into this sort of foggy area. And personally, I'm not as concerned with the definition per se as what it can do to help our learners. I'm looking for the outcomes, really. So if this definition works for you, use it. I will say it has some limitations. And I think one of the limitations is that it sort of drives people into the game mechanics that people have heard most about, and really caused gamification to get a lot of bad PR for many, many years. And that would be things like the points, badges, and leaderboards. Nothing wrong with any of those, but gamification can be so much more than that. So let's look at that for a minute. We'll talk about points, because that one, it's virtually impossible to design anything in learning, especially if it's digital, that there's not some points involved. And honestly, just little side quest here for a moment. Something to think about just in general in learning, whether you're gamifying or not, is our point system in learning has traditionally been everybody starts with 100 points and you can only go down. How many points did you lose on the test? How many points did they take off for punctuation? How many points it's always lose, 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 lose. That's not a real motivating position to put people in. Games, on the other hand, often start you at 0 and you gain experience, you gain points, you work your way up to where you want to go. So just something to think about just in the sort of scheme of things is, should everything be reductive and punishment? Or are we having missed opportunities to create this additive process? Because that can often build some momentum and keep people moving forward. So that's another little side quest tip as we go. So again, with the points, not sure if anybody saw the movie, came out a number of years ago now, called Up in the Air. And in this movie, George Clooney's character is obsessed with his frequent flyer miles. And frequent flyer miles are any loyalty programs. Those are a form of gamification. We can put them in that category. And yes, I absolutely agree about the LMS comment, and we will come back and talk some more about that later. So I love the chat. Keep your comments and questions. If you have questions as we're going along, please don't hesitate to put those in as well. So in the movie, Anna Kendrick's character is just a little perplexed because she doesn't understand the obsession and says, well, isn't that just a number? And unfortunately, this is how many people treat gamification, especially when they first get started, is we just assign points to things and we don't think about the meaning. We don't think about why those points would matter to somebody. But in the movie, George Clooney's character makes this really powerful comment. I'd be the 7th person to do it. He's not doing it because of the points. He's doing it because those points represent status. They represent something that not many other people on the planet have ever done. Then the points matter. So if you are starting your gamification journey, one of the things I really encourage you to think about is whatever you're using, figure out how it serves the learners and how you can apply meaning, because otherwise they're just points or whatever tool you're using. So instead, when I look at gamification, this is what I see. I see the learner in this messy Venn diagram. I couldn't even do enough circles to make it really a Venn diagram, but the learner is at the center. And I have this whole toolbox of things that I can use to create gamification. And all of these things are connected to it, things we don't think about. It's really about behavioral economics. It's really about the experience, the aesthetics, the project-based learning. All of these pieces are part of the magical toolbox that gamification can be, much richer and much deeper. So let's think about it in a slightly different way. Gabe Zigerman, who's one of the early proponents of gamification, he was in the marketing space, not education, but I think he's dead on with his very pithy sort of comment here. We're not making games in gamification. We're making games work for us. We're recognizing that games have exploded as being this amazing thing that engages people, and it has outstripped, in terms of dollars spent and time, hours spent and everything, it outstrips books and movies and all sorts of entertainment options. And part of that is because it's participatory, because we get to do it, we get to take action, we get to participate with other people. It's not like and it changes. It's not like a book. Every time I read a book, I get the same ending. I may or may not get the same ending when I play a game. And our learning can be the same way if we just think a little more creatively. So what we're going to do now, if you have that piece of paper, I don't think it's fair for me to stand up here and talk about gamification if I'm not going to model some of that behavior. So if you have your piece of paper, remaining in the rest of the presentation, I have not very carefully hidden some letters. You'll be able to spot them pretty darn easily. Not trying to make this a complicated eye test or anything. But if you can fill in these blanks, by the time we get to the end, and you may have to unscramble the letters just a little bit, but by the end, you're going to come out with another tip that I always give people, whether they're focused on gamification or they're just trying to create better learning experiences. Because for me, I don't care if people gamify everything, but I think if we start to look at things a little bit differently and through these different gameful lenses, it's going to really impact how we design things. So give you a second to scribble down a blank so you can take a little screen capture or whatever's easiest for you. And then by the end, we'll check in and we'll see if anybody is able to solve the clue or solve the phrase. All right. So that's our little Easter eggs we're looking for. So to finish up talking a little bit about my sort of approach to gamification, which again is radically different than some you may have heard before, and that's okay. That's the beauty of this. We can have different ways of doing this. Now, at the top of this, I have the spectrum between game design and UX. So we're going to start there. Game design is all about putting obstacles in people's way, more struggle. A game is not a game if there's not obstacles. Golf would not be a game if I just said, put the ball in the hole. It'd be much easier if I just walked over and put a ball in a hole. But that's not a game. If I make it a tiny hole and a tiny ball and I make it far away and I give you a stick and I put some trees and some sand traps, and now it's a game. That's what makes it a game. It's the struggling part. Now, on the other end with UX, think Amazon orange one-click button. Way too easy, right? A little too easy sometimes. Less struggle. Now, that's a spectrum of opportunities. And I would say that instructional design lives all along there. And not to be, it's not a technical term or anything. It's just one I sort of think works here. I'm going to call that appropriate struggle. Because sometimes we want people to have a little more struggle, sometimes a little less. Sometimes we have to make things, chunk things into smaller pieces, make the getting to the content a little easier, not dumbing down anything, not making the thinking easier, but just the process sometimes, if we put it into, as we often do, smaller pieces is a big one that we often use. Maybe putting it into things like accessibility issues, less struggle. If I have a transcript, or I can listen to it, or I can participate in it in different ways, that would be less struggle for the learner. On the other side, sometimes in instructional design, I want to do a complex sort of scenario, branching scenario, or simulation or something. Some of it can be very complex, more toward the game side of things. Now, gamification for me is sort of the dial or the lever that I can use to augment the instructional design and shift it more in one direction or the other. So I can make specific design choices that will move the learner. Sometimes I need to nudge them a little bit more. Sometimes I want to give them more freedom to explore. So gamification is that sort of area where I can make those decisions. All right. So it's just a different way to kind of position it, which means for me, gamification, and this is not a definition clearly, but gamification is more about a methodology. It's more about the design process itself. And so it is very iterative. This is not ADDIE. This is not waterfall. This is not any of those design, just very linear things. This is an iterative process. And we have to kind of keep looking at it, keep rolling with it, and try things. And we're not going to get it right on the first try. And that has to be okay. And that's a very gameful approach to things, is that it's okay. Try again, reset, restart, try it again. Also, I mentioned that it's a way to augment instructional design. It's not going to fix bad design, but it can augment and elevate good design. And then finally, it really is a mindset. When you start to look at things with this sort of gameful approach, you can't unsee it. I have to warn you. Wait, there's no going back. Once you start to do it, you'll start to see little things everywhere, and opportunities will just open themselves up for you in really interesting and new ways. So I encourage you to, take a peek and see how that would work for you. Now, my final thing, just to kind of, I'm not even going to call this gamification 101. Let's call this gamification 50 and a half. I don't know. It's like the mini version of the mini version. At the end of this presentation, I have a link where you can go and download a whole bunch more about a lot of the things that I am talking about. So that is my gift to you. So I will explain in more detail what the game plan is, but just to get you thinking about it, for me, the game plan is an easy way to start to think about design, not just gamification design, but this is how I generally sort of think through things and walk people through thinking about their designs. So it stands for goals, audience, mechanics, and experience. But the words again, let's go through and be clear about what we're meaning here. So one of the main reasons that gamified projects and projects in general fail is because they don't have clear goals. And I don't mean clear learning objectives. Obviously, that would be a problem too. But why are you using gamification, or why are you using whatever technique you're using? Really dig into why and what the goals are for that. I'll say one of the problematic goals that I hear is people will come and say, I really need you to help me with some gamification. I need to make this more fun. Yeah, fun. If fun is your reason, is your goal, your project's not off to a really good start, because fun means so many different things to different people, and it's really not going to get you to the learning outcomes. It's part of it. And if you have a good design and people are engaged, the fun will come out of it. But when you intentionally try to just tack some fun onto something and think that's going to fix it, that's, you hear those phrases like lipstick on a pig and things like that. So we have to be clear about the goals. We also have to be really clear about the audience. This is the second most common reason, maybe the number one, that projects fail, is that they don't take into account who the audience is and really respect who the audience is. We have this tendency to create content, and we create the way we think that everybody should learn. And I understand there's templates and there's certain procedures we have to follow in many situations, but there's always this opportunity to really think about who the audience is. So whether you're doing learner personas, whether you are just continuing to reach out interview your learners, if you have access to them, the more you can get to know that audience and understand that they're individual people and they all like different things. They're going to respond to different things. And when we're designing, the best thing we can do with gamification is to offer an array of things, because one thing is not going to appeal to everybody. You need to have some different options. So some people are going to like more of the exploring. Some people are achievement based. Some people like just the social part. They get to play with their friends. Like there's a whole lot of different things that we can leverage. But we have to really respect the audience. And I've seen some projects go really dreadfully badly when that did not happen. I think I might put that as the number one reason, even over the goals, believe it or not. Now, mechanics here. I know I mentioned game mechanics earlier, but in this instance, I'm not talking about just game mechanics. I want you to think about yourself when you're designing something as being the mechanic of putting it together. How are you putting all these pieces together? Or if you're facilitating or instructing, how are you putting everything together, making sure it all works? So in this case, we're the mechanic that is building the learning engine that is driving that audience to those goals. You could think of it that way. They all have to work together, and you have to keep checking in when you start picking your activities and your game elements or any of that stuff. Okay, does this work for this audience? Is this servicing the goal? How is this all working together to create the overall experience? And does this experience work for the context that I am trying to put it into? Different organizations have different cultures. Different institutions have different rules. We have to make sure that it still works within the experience and the ecosystem that you're working in. And that's a very short version of going through this, because obviously we could have spent the entire session just talking about the various pieces of this one slide. But I'm hoping that today, what I do for you is not teach you everything that you needed to know, but spark an idea that you take away, that each of you takes away one little nugget that you can then build on, that you can go and find out more about or experiment with. To me, that's the win. I love when people give me a nice rating after a presentation or a workshop. That's very nice. And I enjoyed your session. It was really exciting. But what's better is when people come back to me a year later, 2 years later. I had somebody recently, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago that I last saw them, and they wanted to tell me something they had done using the things we had done in the workshop. That's the win. So I encourage you all, if I say anything remotely interesting today, please follow up on it. Make a point of taking some action on it. Too often we come to wonderful events like this. I looked at your program. You have amazing speakers. Please do not do yourself the disservice of rushing through all of these sessions and taking some notes and then putting them on the shelf. Please schedule some time for yourself to take some action on some of them, whether it's my session or one of the other sessions. I'm just trying to kind of set the stage for the next couple of days, because I know you're going to just have a ton of wonderful speakers. And so that's just my suggestion to you, is make sure that you take some action on some of these things and don't let those wonderful opportunities slip away. All right. So we're going to switch gears a little bit. That was sort of my commercial break in the middle. We're going to switch gears just a little bit and talk more specifically about the other two words that I hear most often when people ask me about gamification, and that would be motivation and engagement, our word of the day. So quite often people come and they swear to me that all of their students wear these t-shirts. And I say, really? Are you sure? And I say, well, how about we reframe this? Do you really mean that they're not motivated to do what you want them to do? They're not taking the actions you want them to take? Are they really not motivated? Because I bet they are. It's probably just not being directed the way you want it to be directed. Motivation can appear in a whole lot of different ways. So a lot of times when you see students who don't appear to be motivated, one of the leading causes is they're confused. Sometimes it's something about the design of the class, or it could be other barriers. Maybe they're just not feeling well. There's, other things going on. But quite often we need to look at why they appear to not be motivated. And it may be something we can impact. Not always, but sometimes it can. And I started thinking much more deeply about this several years ago when I read this quote by Edward Deci. So Edward Deci's name may sound familiar to you if you've ever read anything about self-determination theory. He's half of the team that came up with that. But what was really intriguing to me about this was for years, we all talked about how do we get people more motivated? How do we motivate the people? How do we motivate? And he switches it. And this is, again, one of these gameful mindset sort of shifts. What if we didn't try to motivate the people? What if we focused our attention on creating the right conditions? What if we focused it differently? What if we tried that? And I can tell you from my experience, it works a lot better because, again, individuals are individuals, and what motivates one person doesn't motivate somebody else. But if we can create an overall environment where they can flourish and that motivation can come out, yes, sometimes we need a little extrinsic motivation to maybe get them started or nudge them, but we have a much better chance of getting them moving and keeping them engaged, which then led me to the question of, are these two things connected? And if so, how? How are they connected? Because again, we use these words, and for years I did it myself, like, oh, motivation, engagement. Sure, I know what that means, but I hadn't really thought about it that deeply. And then I was watching TV one day, and they had some reruns of the old show Mythbusters. I don't know if anybody's ever watched that. This animation is not from that, but this animation is of a flywheel. And a flywheel, they had a really giant one on the show. It was really cool, but it takes a lot of effort to get it moving. And you see the wheels moving real slow. And then you keep putting a little bit of effort into it, it keeps moving and it goes faster and faster. And then it picks up momentum. And then we can keep it moving. Think about a pottery wheel. If you press the pedal, if you've seen one of those, and the wheel spins and you press the pedal, you have to put a little energy into it. But then you get this lovely, steady circle. And the same thing can happen with motivation and engagement, or at least that's my suggestion today. If you think about it, motivation is getting the wheel to move. Get you to move. We have to put some effort into it. That either has to be intrinsic from the learner. They're just really interested in this. They really want to do this. Or maybe it's a little extrinsic. We need to help them get started. We kind of need to give them that little push. But once you get the learner going, it's engagement that keeps them moving. I could be really motivated, but that doesn't always guarantee that I stay engaged. And I may be highly engaged because something really fun happened, or there's just this one activity that captured my attention, but it doesn't maintain my motivation. So I think these do work together in this cycle, sort of like the flywheel. So it just is another way to kind of think about these ideas. And again, this is one way. I've seen other people with other suggestions that work just as well. But what my hope is that you will think for yourself how you think they work together and for your environment, because your environment may be very different than the environments I work in. So just continue to come back and ask yourself those questions. Remember, we started with learners deserve better. They deserve for us to keep checking in and saying, okay, that worked well before. Is that still the best answer? And okay, have I thought about that? Maybe I need to look at this from a different angle. Let's see how that would work. So continue to sort of ask yourself those questions. All right, so we're back to, I don't think that word means what you think it means. So in our final minutes together, I want to dig into learner engagement a little bit. And I want to suggest that rather than it being this one sort of monolithic term, that there's a lot of ways that we could parse this out and we could look at it. And the different aspects of engagement, you may choose different design choices to encourage. So what do I mean by that? Again, this is not the model. This is a model of 4 types of engagement that you might want to be using. So pretty straightforward. We want people thinking, we want them doing things, sharing, and feeling. So a couple of examples of each just to kind of start to get you thinking about these different topics. So with cognitive engagement, that's probably the one that pops to mind early on when we're talking about learning. We do want people to be thinking. One of the easiest ways to trigger cognitive engagement is to ask a beautiful question. And a beautiful question, that term comes from Warren Berger's book, A More Beautiful Question. And it means a question that shifts your thinking. So where do you want to go for lunch is not necessarily a beautiful question. No matter how much I love pizza, that's not a beautiful question. But asking a question that I have to really think about, asking questions that we can't necessarily Google the answers to, those are the kind of questions that trigger things. Questions that also are surprising, are incredibly powerful. Surprise is at one time that the brain kind of stops for a second. There's a little brainwave that spikes and all other cognitive function stops for a brief moment. And then the brain kind of sorts it out and puts everything in its little schema and resumes action. Surprise can be very powerful in triggering those little cognitive moments. But questions, actually any kind of question, the brain cannot help but answer a question. If I ask, how are you doing today? What questions do you have? Anything like that, your brain immediately has to try to answer it. You may not verbalize it, but the brain is working on it because the brain that's how we are wired. The other way to trigger cognitive engagement quite effectively is often to give choice. If you can let people choose their own adventure in some way, and there is probably 1,000 ways you could do this. You can, obviously we talk about, you could give them different activities to choose from, how they present their mastery to us, when they do it, the order of things they do. Any opportunity you have to give people choice gives them autonomy, which is very powerful for motivation. Provide them with some autonomy. It gives them ownership. I've made a choice. I have decided which one I'm doing. These all can be very powerful triggers to both motivation and engagement. So as an example, and it has some byproducts too. In 2020, I was doing a keynote, and it was obviously the middle of the pandemic and everybody was zoomed out and exhausted. And so I said, you know what, I want to do something really different. And I created this whole program around a map. So it was a journey. The whole thing was a journey. And I started the presentation and I talked a little bit about mindset. That was the first sort of stop we made. And then I said, okay, we're going to continue down the road. And we got to a point in the presentation and I brought up a slide that now had two choices. I said, we're at a fork in the road. Which one do we take? And I let the audience vote. And they picked one. Let's say they picked action. So I talked about action. When we finished that segment of the presentation, we got back in the car and we continued down the road and we reached a place where there were 3 exits. Notice I'm increasing their choices. I'm making it a little more difficult for them to choose as we go along. And then again, they vote, they pick one, and that's what I talked about. So I did have to design all 6 of the stories, so to speak, and I only presented 3 of them that day. But what happened afterwards was partially what I hoped would happen. I had several people contact me and they said, what if we had chosen the other one? Now, how many times do you have a learning experience that people go back and want to replay, like a game? This is what I was shooting for. I was like, they want to know. I have created the curiosity. They want to know what those other ones were. So I had little videos. I had actually pre-recorded videos of each of the 6. So whichever ones they didn't pick, I had videos ready. But these are the kind of things we can do that are not terribly difficult. There's nothing rocket science-y about what I did there. I just was a little more creative. I gave it a little more thought about how this would impact the learners, the people I was going to be speaking to. And I wanted them to be curious and I wanted them to go back and want to know what they missed out on. And they did. So I call that one a win. That was a good day. That was a really good day. And feel free, steal all of these ideas, any of them that you like. So the next type of engagement that we could be triggering, we could be focused on would be behavioral, the doing. Are we having people do something or are we just talking at them, right? We want them to be participating as part of it. So also, we need for people to stay in action, they need to know where they're supposed to be going and what they're supposed to be doing. And again, back to that motivation t-shirt, sometimes people get stuck because they're not clear what to do. And when somebody gets stuck, the longer they stay stuck, the more likely it is that they stop and don't get moving again. And then that flywheel, it takes a lot of effort to get them started again because they were already stuck. And now we have to get over the feelings of being stuck. And it's much more complicated than giving them a clear pathway to begin with and detours. A friend of mine did a study years ago. She had access to this huge data set from her university, and they found that in a self-directed course, when people did at least one activity out of order, they had a higher completion rate. Again, the study didn't look into why this was. We could come up with a lot of reasons that we think it is. I think part of it is that it gave them choice and it gave them the opportunity to take a detour if they got stuck. There's a couple of reasons that it could have been. So it'd be interesting to look into a little more. But this time and time again, I have seen be a very powerful tool. Also, nudges and hints. It's okay to give people a hint sometimes, right? Is the goal to torture them, or is the goal to get them to the learning results? So sometimes we do. Sometimes we need to remind people of things. I know it's, oh, they're adults if they are. They're adults and they should know and they should remember. Well, you know what? We are adults and we have a lot of things going on in our lives and in our heads, and we forget things sometimes. So it's okay. I give you permission. I give you the permission slip to give them a little nudge, give them a hint, things like that. Those are all behavioral things that we could do. Now, social sharing, that one's pretty straightforward. We know that learning is social. We have ways that we discussion boards and conversations and Zoom meetings, and we have all sorts of ways that we share. But a couple of things to think about here is, are we creating those inclusive and safe places? Are we really including everybody? And I love, not a big TV watcher, but I've seen a couple of clips from Modern Family, and I know enough to know that poor Gloria gets made terribly. They make fun of her all the time because she kind of butchers some of the metaphors and idioms and things. And this moment where she just blurts out, "Do you even know how smart I am in Spanish?" is so telling and is such an amazing reminder to all of us when we're designing that, yeah, are we thinking about the learner and how each learner, and obviously we can't know each learner's brain, but putting ourselves in that learner's position and going, wow, do I have a lot of students that English is not their first language? Do I maybe have opportunities here to create activities and opportunities for them to express themselves in ways that shows they know the content and is easier for them to express while still learning all of the important things if it's a college course and they need to know how to format everything properly and everything. But that mixture and having that balance and giving people those opportunities can be a really good thing. Also, an opportunity we often miss is going beyond the cohort. I was always very frustrated when I went back to grad school and I knew that there were 5 or 6 different sessions of, let's say, Instructional Design 101, and I couldn't talk to anybody in any of the other groups. I could only talk to the people in my group. So whenever possible, I try to design things where you get to talk to one another. I did a large-scale customer service program years ago, and we had individual cohorts. It was a 6-week program. And we had, at the end of each group, we had them leave messages for the next group, some little ideas, just a tip, whatever they wanted to say. They were anonymous, and we call them, the program had a space theme, so we call them postcards from space. And they were very impactful. So when the new group came in and they got these messages of encouragement or suggestions on how to tackle the program or anything, it was a very powerful thing to do. So again, finding different ways to be social besides the traditional ones that we often use can find these new engagement hooks and places to really capture people's attention. And then finally, emotion. If you can get them feeling it, that's very sticky in learning. We remember things, the brain remembers feeling quite a bit. And a lot of ways we trigger that are often through story or characters. A lot of times I've designed things with people and they have a character. We don't just say a user had a problem with their order and what would you do? Like if it's some sort of training thing or something. No, Roberta called the customer service center today and you create these characters and you make it personal and you provide some backstory to them often. Or you have the learners helping the character. In games, we're often either being guided by a character, we're helping a character, or we're battling a character. And we can use all of those sort of ideas when we are designing our learning in making it more story-like, adding these ideas of characters. So you don't have to be the only guide on the side. The guide can be baked into the learning experience. I know one professor who created a character of himself, basically, in his syllabus, and it kind of guided people through the course. I thought it was just, it's a wicked cool course. So something to think about. And also with emotion, don't forget to celebrate. You know, in gamification, we talk about recognition and rewards a lot. Don't forget to celebrate the wins. Now, again, that doesn't mean everybody gets a trophy, everybody gets a badge just because they clicked a button, but we can recognize things. So find those moments to create that joy and that celebration. So to wrap these together and show you that it doesn't have to be huge and it doesn't have to even be difficult. And you don't need the latest tech and you don't need anything other than what you have and a desire to create something special. This picture, which is not a very good picture, granted, but I was on a flight and I did not know that I was going to need to be taking pictures in the middle of the flight. So I apologize for the quality of it here, but I hope you can tell at least I'm on an airplane. In fact, I was on an airplane flying to Florida, which is part of why this story is so appropriate today. And I was going to be talking about engagement. And I had my whole presentation ready. And then I got on this plane and I changed the whole ending to my presentation because the flight attendant on that plane did a way better job of explaining the 4 types of engagement I just talked about than I ever could have done. I probably should have just told this story and skipped the other part. But we're about midway through the flight and the flight attendant comes on with an announcement. Now, that immediately triggered cognitive engagement because people were like, what's going on? They got curious. It got the brain, it woke the brain up a little bit, like what's going on? Because that was a little unusual. So this flight, obviously it was coming specifically to Orlando. So there were probably, 100 passengers and about 300 ears because there were lots of people going to Disney. So there were lots of extra Mickey ears on that flight. And sitting a few rows in front of me, there was a little girl. And you can sort of see, or if you're on a big screen, you can sort of see a little hand up in the mid left part of this picture. Well, it turns out the flight attendant says, somebody on the flight today has a birthday. So we're like, oh, how cute. So then people are curious because they're still looking around like, who has the birthday? So we're still in cognitive engagement at that point. The flight attendant then says, okay, I need you all, if you're sitting next to a window, to pull down the window shade next to you. Okay, we have now shifted to behavioral engagement. She's asking us to participate in a way that we are taking some action. Most people did it. Most people are playing along. Most people did it. She has to put on her best Mary Poppins voice, however, because a few people did not immediately comply. And she was either a nanny, school teacher, or something in a former life because she's like, that's okay. I'll wait until everyone pulls down the window shade. So now, of course, a few more people do it. So she's got people taking actions. She then says, I want everyone to look over your heads and I want you to press the call button. Don't turn on your reading light. I want you to press the call button. She's now created some social engagement because guess what? Half the people on the flight have no idea which button she's talking about. And you see the people pointing and talking to one another and kind of, so she's now got some social engagement going there, just that quickly. And so we get all the lights turned on. And then she says, okay, you are all now part of, the little girl's name was Greta. You are all now part of Greta's birthday cake. You could hear the gasps on the plane. And when I tell the story in person, I often hear people gasp in the audience because you're like, oh, I did not see that coming. Did not see that one coming. I figured we were going to sing happy birthday. Didn't see we were going to be on a birthday cake. So then again, we sing, she tells Greta, okay, when we're finished, you're going to blow out the candles. So we sing, she blows out the candles, we turn off the button, and you hear ding, 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 as all the lights go out. And then we're all just back in our flight heading to Orlando. But I guarantee you, people like me are still telling that story because it got all the way through all the levels of engagement. And she did that in a matter of a few minutes. Didn't take any longer than it took me to do the story. A couple of minutes, she engaged everybody on that flight, or nearly everybody. There might have been a little Scrooge on there, I don't know. But from where I was sitting in the back, it looked like pretty much everybody was engaged. And you could feel the happiness and the joy when the whole thing was done. And what did she use? She used what she had around her. She had a plane. She had some call buttons. She had some passengers. And she created magic. And we have the capacity to do that. And it really doesn't take a whole lot of effort. It does just take us trying something different. So by now, I have given you all of the letters to the answer, and I knew my friend Deborah would solve it because she is a puzzle master extraordinaire. She is correct. Think big, start small is my suggestion to you. It doesn't take much, and don't feel like you can't do it if you can't do everything at once. Pick one little thing and start there and build on it, because that one little thing can be magical. So with that, I give you a link where you can go. You can grab a whole bunch more content. And I hope that some of you will stay in touch with me. I know Victoria mentioned at the beginning in the platform you're using, there's a networking option, but I have all my contact information here as well. I'm always happy to talk to anybody. And thank you again so much just for having me here today. I'll turn it back over to Victoria.
Well, thank you so much for a great insight into gamification and how it